Hello and welcome to the Adventures of LBZ. I am Lance Collins, and if you're new to this channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button. In today's video, we're building a 2022 Honda Forman Rubicon winch setup. Essentially, we're not building the ATV, but we're going to put a winch on this ATV, and I'm listing all the part numbers right now that you need. So what we'll do first is remove the seat, get that out of the way. Then we'll remove the shelter that is around the gas tank, an engine area there. You'll go ahead and it pops out. It's just got rubber grommets that hold it in. Put that aside, make sure it doesn't get damaged. There's also a little tab that holds the compartment in the back, and then you lift up above the battery cover itself. Now I am actually going to reach my hand in between the airbox and the rack there and push that little tab out, and I actually have to do it with the screwdriver on this one because it was a little too tight. But normally you can push your finger in there and remove that little relay, and then get it aside safely so that you don't hit it with any kind of drill bits or anything, because next what I'm going to do is drill a hole and right beside the square where that piece plugs into, and that basically I'm going to be using to run a power wire through that into the battery compartment. And before I drill it, I get my spring punch out and go ahead and make a little dimple there so that the drill bit doesn't slip down and tear this nice camo plastic up. And I was trying to show you what size the drill bit was that I used, but you know, I cut it off because I didn't have the camera in a good spot. But if you need to know, I can just shoot me a message on there and I can look up what that was on the tool pack that I have. So we'll go ahead and get that hole drilled into the plastic. You got to kind of push down on it too a little bit, because the wire has loom on it whenever you buy these kits from Honda. And it's a Warren setup that we're putting on there, but it is the factory Honda stuff. Now what I'm going to do right there with that tool is go into the hole and get any of the burrs out. It basically just takes any of the burrs off the plastic so that you don't pull any of the wire coating off when you pull it through. And the burrs were a little tricky on this one, so I ended up having to get the Benchmade bug out and just, you know, cut the little piece off there just to make the install a little cleaner. Now, if you buy this, they're not going to tell you to drill that hole. They're going to have you run the wire over top of the basically like the rack area in the back. It's covered up by that black piece of plastic that was on my toolbox, but I think it looks like crap, so I always drill the hole, run it through. It's a little bit extra time, but it looks better in the end. And yes, my lift needs a little bit of work. She's getting old. No, it's not that old. It just gets used so much, and even with you know, daily lube and stuff like that, things just get wore out. Writing down on my toolbox here what I'm using at the time. That way I don't have to repeat myself a million times. You'll see the little board there throughout this video with all the different tools that I'm writing down. So those bolts there are 10 millimeters. There's also some 12 millimeter bolts up there, but the skid plate, to drop the skid plate down, what I did is I took the two front ones out, and then there's two that are directly below it in line in the center of the machine. I took those out so that I can drop that skid plate down in the front part of it. Also just took the 12 millimeter bolts out of Or actually, I'm sorry, those were 10mm bolts too. They're fender bolts, but I just put a 12mm on there, and that's basically the rest of the hardware for this front bumper. They're all 12mm stuff there. So you're going to want to take, basically there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 bolts that hold the front bumper on. There's 2 10mm and 6 12mm. And then I took a bungee on my lift and just tied, well, I was trying to tie down the skid plate there because it's still hooked up with a few bolts on my lift there. But if you have something that can hold that down, it'll make your life a lot easier. And then I'm taking the final 12mm out of the bottom there. This will release this front bumper, and I can take it out and get the winch mounted to that. And now it's time to remove the front bumper. I went ahead and pulled the hardware out, and just basically you you pull out forward, and then you got to kind of push it down and pull back at the same time, so that there's 2 bars that are in the inside that go up and hook behind the headlights will pull out from the plastic. And you want to lay that somewhere where it's nice and clean and there's no debris or anything on it, so that you don't tear up the bumper. And now it's time to tap the hole out on the frame. I use an 8x 1 1/4 tap. I'd spray it down with a little brake clean, and then I put a little bit of the rust penetrator on there. Use that as a lube basically for the tap whenever I'm tapping it out. Go ahead and clean this up and get any of the leftover threads from the bolt out, and it kind of gets the powder coat and stuff that was left over when they were doing the frames. We'll go ahead and get that done and be right back. And I know I'm a weirdo. I take all the tools apart, put them back how I had them before, but I don't lose tools. I have all the tools that I've bought over the years. I don't lose them. I still have all my tins and wrenches and in sockets. Got to be neat and organized. It just helps you go a lot faster, especially when you're flat rate. If you know where everything's at. Occasionally you'll see me fumble a drawer or something, but other than that, if you have everything nice and organized, you can roll through some work. And it also looks better too if somebody comes back there and they're looking at you as a technician, and you have a sloppy, dirty bay. They're not going to want you to work on it. So this is all the stuff. These are the part numbers. I'm actually ended up putting a plow and a back rack, but we'll do another video on the plow installation. It would be 3 hours long if I had to do all that stuff. So just wanted to try to keep it short and simple. I'll go ahead and get all this stuff unpackaged and dumped out here on the workbench. Get it organized in the way I want to organize it so that it's easy for me. And then we'll get to putting this thing on. I honestly think when you're putting these winches on these ATVs, it takes longer to unbox all the parts and get everything organized than it does to actually install the winch itself. And now that I have everything cut open there, I'm going to get the switch, and I'm going to go ahead and put the 2 screws. There are 2 silver screws that are in the pack there. I think they already have washers on them too, lock washers. And I'm going to mount that plate. Now if you look there, I put the bolt hole that is on the L bracket itself, the single bolt hole, towards the back, because that's going to move the switch further forward. Just makes it a little bit easier whenever you're trying to use it, if you're going to use it for plowing and stuff. But yeah, you'll go ahead and put those 2 Phillips screws in and tighten them down. And then what I'll do is take the 2 bracket pieces, and there's a long and a short Allen bolt and 2 lock washers, and I'll put the lock washers, basically I'll take the long bolt, and you'll see here, I'll put the bracket on the back side of that other bracket, and I'll take my long bolt, put a washer on the bolt, which I struggle with here for a second because I'm trying to hold too much at one time. But I'll get that lock washer on there eventually, and slide it through the bracket that's on the switch, and then through the little bracket that mounts it to the bar. And then I'll take the other side of that bracket and slide it onto the bolt. And then I'll take the other lock washer, put it on in my nut, and I'll get that the other finger tight for a second. Then I'll grab the short bolt and a lock nut, and I take those and get this on the handlebar. Not gonna lie, the hardware that comes with that little bracket right there is junk. I think they use the softest metal known to man for the threads that they use for an Allen. You'll see that I don't even go for an Allen wrench on it. I go for a Torx bit whenever I go to tighten that down. And you don't want to tighten it with the actual Torx. You want to use the 8mm that is on the other side of it. You're just using that Torx basically to hold that bolt, because if you try to tighten it with the ratchet, it will strip it out. They are crappy. Also, the bolts that they use for the hardware has some kind of coating on it, and it is a pain in the ass. You will see when you go to put it together. You better have a good impact, because those bolts, if you're trying to tighten them by hand, you're going to be there for a long time, because they are extremely tight with that coating that is on those bolts. And like I said, I'm going to use a T15 and the 8mm. The 8mm wrench is going to be what's doing all the torquing, because these bolts are really soft where the Allen is supposed to be just cheap manufacturing. You guys know what I'm talking about. The quality of a lot of stuff that used to be good American-made stuff, which is not now American-made anymore. It's been subbed out to these other places, and it is terrible. But anyways, we'll get that tightened up and in place where it needs to be, and then I'll take the wire and run it down through the neck and get the wire hidden. And I'll use one of the supplied wire ties and tie this winch wire onto the bar. What I do is actually loosen the stock one up. I slip the winch control wire through it, move it up a little bit, and then I take a second one and wire tie the wires closer to the bottom where it's kind of going around the handlebar right there close to where the clamp is. And that just keeps that wire tucked in there nice and, keeps it looking factory still. Time to get the winch out of the box. Also in this box there's going to be the the hook, there'll be the contact switch and the roller fair lead. We'll get that out and unboxed and get it onto the winch mounting bracket itself. And now I'll remove that front panel, and if you see that red connector right there, on the back side there's a brown tab that has two tabs. You press that in, pull the tabs out, because what you're going to do is unplug that red connector, and then you'll go to the back side of the 12-volt accessory socket if your ATV is equipped with it. If not, they have a different harness that will go in place of that there. But does the same thing essentially. You're going to run the wires to that same area, but you're going to unplug. If you have this 12 volt, you're going to undo the clip on the back side of the 12 volt socket, and then you're going to pull that wire through. You'll see me do that now. There that is. What I do is, if I'm doing one of these for a customer, I put this into this pouch here, fold it over, stick it in there. That way they can, if they ever need to, they can reuse that connector. But this from Honda has two accessory, one 2-wire and one 1-wire accessory plugs that plug into that red port. and it also plugs back into the 12-volt socket, so it keeps everything there. Just add some extra areas that you can plug some Honda accessories into. And now you'll take the red end there to that connector, and you'll feed it back up through the spot where the old one came through, and plug it back in, and the little brown snap piece will plug in. You'll tuck the wire back in, and you'll have your other wires back over here. You'll take the black connector if you have the 12-volt socket, and you will plug it back into the 12-volt socket that I'm showing you right there, and plug it back on. And for the winch, you're just going to use the single wire. It's going to be a white and black wire. It's basically a power signal wire to your winch button, so that you can send power to the contactor that sends power to the winch. Then you're going to get the other harness that came in the winch package. You'll see that there's a side that has 3 wires. Should have white, green, and black. You'll plug that in on your white wire. That's the single one coming off there. See how that is? And then you'll take the other with the 3 connectors there. You'll take that white wire with the black, and you're going to connect it to the red wire. I know that the rest of them are all color-coded correctly, but I don't know why they do that. They should have just made it white and black too to match it. But yeah, then you'll take the black wire and connect to the black wire, and the green wire and connect to the green wire. And after that, you'll take the rest of that harness, and you're going to feed it back down in between the frame rail and stuff there to keep it so that it doesn't get into anything. You can zip tie it to stuff when it's down in there, and run it down to your winch contactor that you're going to put on the frame later on in the video. And the camera was kind of in a crappy position there, but what I did was the rest of the excess wire up top, I just went ahead and neatly bunched it up, back and forth, so that it made a nice little bunch of the wires. And then I'll take a little bit of black tape, I'll wrap around that to keep them together, and then a zip tie, and zip tie that to the existing harness that's in there. You'll see if you have one of these, there's multiple wires that run underneath there, so you have stuff that you can zip tie it to, or you can tuck them up in there. But yeah, that's what I usually do. So I zip tied the wire and cut the excess off. So I'll go ahead and get the winch out, get all the wires and the contactor out. I'll take the contactor and we'll mount it to the contactor bracket. You'll see that there's a bracket that's got like a bend in it, and the bolts will line up to the bolts on the contact switch assembly. You'll take the bolt it's a silver bolt, it's got the collared bolt, and you'll put a rubber washer on it. Then you will put it through the holes that are on the bracket, and there's 8mm bolts, or 8mm nuts that go on the other side of it there, and you'll go ahead and put those on and tighten it up. And both the head of the bolt and head of the nut are 8mm. As you'll see, I'll be pointing to or drawing on my toolbox there. Yeah, there you go. 8mm. Those are wrenches times 2. And then you'll tighten those 2 bolts up. And you just want to make sure that you don't blow the rubber out. You want to get them tight, but you don't want to like smash it too tight to where it completely blows it out. It's going to smush it some, but yeah, tighten them down. And then next, what we'll do is we will start to put the wire harness for the winch on there. So you'll see that that all the wires are color coded to the top of the winch contactor. So basically what I'm going to do is the ground wire has its own rubber end on it, and it also has a little ground wire, a brown wire that comes off of it that goes to the contactor, and you'll match that one up with the actual contactor. And there's a pack of nuts that are 10mm nuts, and you'll go ahead and you'll use those to put on the contactor. And what I usually do is you want to look at the direction of what how I'm holding this, and that'll kind of show you how I run my wires. But basically, I'm going to bolt all of the wires to the contactor, and then I'll bolt the contactor to the frame and run the wires from that, to the winch and then to the battery and that stuff there. And I'm writing down that this is a Benchmade bug out knife. The clip on that back of that knife is not from there. It's from a Griptilian. I took the little low profile one off. I like the Griptilian or mini Griptilian clip, for the back better anyways. But anyways, if you're a knife person, you'll appreciate that. Alright, now that I got all those wires onto the contact switch, I'll get the other side of that bracket, and I'll get the hardware. These are 13 millimeter nuts that go to this hardware, and again, it has this stupid coating on it that literally makes it ridiculous to try to tighten up. So I don't know. I don't know why they are been using this kind of bolts on them. Just give us back the regular hardware, Warren. Come on. But yeah. Anyways, I'm going to get an extension out and a swivel, and then I'm going to put that 13 on there and use that to tighten the carriage bolt and nut up there. And I will show you, you'll see where I'm putting this around the frame, and then you can see how I'm going to be routing the wires. But yeah, just basically I'm going to lay this stuff in there. I'm going to come in from the front fender well. I'm going to run the power and the ground wire. Basically split the frame rail that's in there with it that you're going to be putting the contactor on when you mount it. And you'll split those to how they actually are on the contact switch assembly. And I just kind of pull them through and let them sit there for now. And then I'll get the carriage bolt and nut. And about halfway up, not all the way up to the top, but not all the way to the bottom, right in the middle somewhere. You'll go ahead and tighten that U-clamp with the carriage bolt and the nuts with that 13 millimeter. And like I'm saying, I'm using a extension on a little impact, and I just run them down until they are both seated on both sides. And that coating makes it a pain in the ass to try to get the nut on. So good luck, because you are going to be frustrated trying to get that first thread to catch. And yes, it's as much of a pain in the ass as it looks. If they just give you some... They're using lock nuts. It's what I don't understand. You already have a lock nut, so why just not use a regular stainless bolt? Basically some cheap manufactured bolt with a coating on it is what they're using. And it's junk. It takes forever. It's stupid. Sorry to rant, but after you do a million of these things, it's so dumb. Alright, so now I'm going to take a couple of zip ties and go down the frame evenly spaced out. Well, as best as I can, evenly space them out, but I run them up through there. As you can see, you push it, grab around the backside, go ahead and you can hook it. Just don't pull it tight. I'm just going to put it on there just a clip or two so it stays in place. And go a little more spaced out down through there. Throw another one, and then I'll probably, actually probably put one or two more on there here in a second. But what you're going to use those for is to support your wires as you're feeding them back down the frame. Usually I start with the ground one, since the wire in the wire loom is a lot thicker than the power wire. And I grab it, I'll lay it up in that, get my other zip tie right there, have another hanger, and I actually will get a little bit of silicone spray out, and right there on the end where my hand is, I will spray that wire so that whenever my next step is, there's a frame rail that goes in between the air box and the frame, and you'll put that wire between it, and it's a tight fit. But if you have some silicone spray, you can spray the wire coating down and a little bit right there by that air box, and pull the wire through there, and it keeps it nice and neat and out of the way of anything, and it won't ever get caught by anything because it's tucked in behind the frame rail. Yeah, that's what I'll go ahead and do now. And then the ground wire, I will actually, behind the air box, there's a little frame rail where the seat latch is, and I'll hang 2 zip ties there. And I will pull that wire that I just ran between that frame rail and the air box and hang it on those zip ties and pull it to the other side of the machine. And there's a ground over there that I will put that wire directly to, so it'll be grounded directly to the machine and not to the battery. And I'll go ahead and also pull the power wire down those same zip ties that I just hung. And in the beginning, whenever I drilled the hole in that back plastic, that is where I'm going to run that power wire through, straight through into the battery box and relay assembly area. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the starter relay assembly, and where the wire that comes off of the battery and goes to that, I'm going to take that 10 millimeter nut loose, and I'm going to take that power wire and hook the winch up to that. Why? Because, for one, the wire they give you is a really tight reach if it's going to go directly to the battery, and 2, you don't have to have all that stuff cluttered up on your battery itself, and it is perfectly fine. And they actually tell you, I believe, in the directions for this winch from Honda to hook it to that contactor assembly. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go ahead and get that wire situated in there and get it onto that starter relay assembly. And like I said, the wire that comes off of the positive on the battery and goes to that's the nut that you want to loosen up. And there's a washer that's in there also. When you take that 10 millimeter nut off, you're going to take the washer off, and you're going to replace that washer with that wire, essentially, because you're not going to have enough thread left to get the washer and the wire in there. Tighten it down, and then you'll put the little rubber boot right back over top of both of them, and you'll be good to go there. And when you tighten that nut down, you do not have to kill it. You just snug it down. Don't hammer on it because you'll break that starter relay, and then you'll be having more problems than having to put a winch on this machine. But yeah, you just snug it up. And then I like to tuck the wires back down into where they go so they are hidden, and then plug that little, I think it's a relay or a fuse? I think it's a fuse, actually. It's a relay right there beside the fuse box. You'll plug that little piece back in. For some dumb reason here in a second, I take one of these zip ties and I actually run it above the plastic. I don't know why. I had to go back and cut it off, and I caught it later on. But yeah, I do it right here, I believe. Look. Didn't even realize until later. But yeah, you'll take some zip ties and do that right there, and that's for that ground wire that I was telling you earlier. I'll run it across the top of the airbox, but below there's a rail there, and you're going to hide the wire. It'll be completely hidden and secured to that bottom rail and out of the way. That way, if you ever have to work on the airbox or any of that stuff there as a mechanic, it is out of the way. Now I'll walk over to this side and I'll grab the ground wire through the fender well, and you'll see there's a group of wires. It's a lot of green wires, and then there's like one maybe black wire that goes to a 10 millimeter bolt that's on the frame. Basically what you're going to do is any excess ground wire, you're going to kind of make a little loop, and well, not a loop, you're not going to wrap it around itself, but maybe like a little 90 in it, kind of, and so that it can tuck in and you can get the proper angle of the 10 millimeter bolt. And you'll take that bolt out that I'm taking out now. It's kind of hard to see in here, but if you have this ATV and your ATV is not dirty, you should be able to see that bolt. Oh, there we go. Forgot I put the flashlight on it. But yeah, there's a group of wires there, and it's basically the ground isolator block, essentially. You'll take that nut or that bolt out, and then you'll put that winch ground wire right to that bolt, and put all those wires back on that bolt and tighten it back down to that spot on the frame. And then you're going to take the excess wire that you have, and there's a harness that runs down that side of the frame, and you'll take a zip tie and you'll put it around that harness, and you'll secure it down so you don't have anything flopping around. It was at this moment I realized I f***ed up. So, off to go get another zip tie to replace the zip tie. But yeah. I get the new one in there, of course. It wanted to fight me when I was trying to get it through there. The first one was a lot easier. But, yeah. I get it put on there, and then I'm going to go through and tighten all my zip ties down and make sure that the wires are pulled tightly and everything is neatly tucked away, not able to get grabbed or pulled out of place by anything at all, or rubbing against the exhaust or anything crazy like that. And we'll go ahead and run the wires that are coming down from the winch selector switch on the handlebar, and we'll plug those on to the correct posts on the actual contactor assembly. There's only two left. Should be just a black and a green because your brown one is already plugged in. That's the middle one. So sometimes you'll have to take the wires that come down, and you might give them a little pull to stretch out the I guess the wire that connects them both together in the center there, and just so that you can make the actual contact on both of them, like where they plug in with the two contactors. And this is where you see I kind of pull on those two wires just to kind of get the tape where they taped them together in the center there, so that you can make the gap to plug them into your winch contactor, and then you will secure that wire with a zip tie. Or like I did, there was actually an existing Honda factory zip tie that you can release with your fingers, and I just released it and then stuck that wire in there against the frame rail and clipped it back together, and that is what I used to secure the wire that came down through there. And now I'll get the winch mount, and I will take the two carriage bolts and put them through the roller fair lead. You'll see the big roller, you want that to be on the bottom side, and the small one will be on the top side. They are, let's see, 15 millimeter nuts. I think I'm going to write that down here. That go on those carriage bolts. Yep, 15 millimeters. Get the cap back on. And then tighten that down. Make sure whenever you tighten those down, you want to kind of press up on the roller fair lead itself. If you have it pulled down towards the bottom, towards the longer part of the mount, then when you go to put it through the front bumper, it'll catch the front bumper, and it'll give you some problems whenever you're bolting it up later on down the line in the process. I've learned the hard way and done that before, and you're just trying to figure out what the heck is going on, why is stuff not lining up, and then you go back and you loosen those two bolts up, and it slides over. It kind of makes a little pop in the bumper and lets everything else spring into where it needs to be. So yeah, just make sure you hold the roller fair lead up so that it's upwards, and you'll be all good. Again, to use lock nuts and a coated bolt, and even with an impact, I mean, it's terrible. If you sit there, we're going to do it with a ratchet, you would have Popeye arms. And you don't usually have to tighten these up, but I guess this one slipped past quality control, and I had to tighten that bottom roller up there, and yeah, the nut was a little loose on the end. I just went ahead and snugged it up just a smidgen. And now we'll go ahead and we will put the winch onto the winch mount itself. You'll see that there's 4 Allen bolts that will recess down into that basically, yeah, they're going to recess down into the actual winch mount. That's what you're going to grab. I think they're like a 5 or 6 millimeter Allen is what I'm using. I think I write it down. I just pull. I'm going to pull a little bit of the winch cable out here too, so it'll go through. Go ahead and feed it through before I flip the winch mount over with the winch on it there and put the 4 screws in. Now, this part can be a little tricky when you're flipping it over there, so you definitely want to have a good bench that you can set the winch down and not damage it. And then you're going to have to hold up on the winch a little bit, and then line your holes up, thread the screws into the holes, and then you can lay the winch down and tighten them up the rest of the way. I use my little torque wrench on this, and I think I set it to 126 inch-pounds is what I ended up doing. And for all the people wondering, yes, I do set my torque wrenches back to 0 when I'm done. I've got several comments in the past of people saying, oh, you don't set your torque wrenches to 0. Well, when I'm finished using the torque wrench, I zero it out and put it back in the toolbox where it needs to be. So I'm going to go ahead and slide the winch onto the front bumper. There are 2 13-millimeter bolts that are on the front part of the winch plate, and they go through the stock holes that are on the front bumper. You do not want to use an end pack to tighten those down. You want to just get a couple threads started on them. You don't want to put them all the way down. I usually wait until the very end and then tighten them all the way. You don't bottom it out there, because if you do, you'll have a hard time getting the winch and the bumper on to the frame itself. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this up and take it over to the front of the ATV and attempt to install it. Sometimes this part right here is a lot easier with a second person. So if you're doing this at home, I would suggest the second person, because it's a pain in the butt right here without damaging your forward. They're all up. See, I can't scratch them or anything because these are customers' brand new ATVs that they have not got yet. So, it takes a little, caressing, but I get it done finally. And once you got it up in there, you kind of, you just want to make sure that the winch back bracket is touching the frame. And then you'll see that there's one of the 12-millimeter bolt holes on there. It's the easiest to get the middle ones first. That's what I normally do. That way you can let go of the actual bumper and, have all of its weight on that winch and on basically those 2 center bolts. Makes it a little easier to get the bolts in also. So yeah, I'll get those 2 12-millimeters in, and then I usually move to the bottom ones. On this particular, when you get the worn mount on this one, you'll have It'll come with its own bolt that goes in the bottom, and it'll have a collar. The collar will go in between, or spacer, whatever you want to call it. It'll go between the bumper and the mount, and then when you put the bolt in there, it'll bolt into the stock part of the frame. You'll see here in a second. I'll go ahead and run these 12s in on the top just a little bit, not all the way down. At the end, I'll finalize them and, you know, tighten them down and whatnot. But for right now, I'm just going to tighten them up just about halfway. That way you can still move the bumper around and line the other holes up. And after you get those 2 bolts in on the bottom, you'll go ahead and put your rack bolts in, and then you can go ahead and tighten all of those bolts down. And then the only 2 bolts you should have left for the actual rack will be the 2 10mm bolts that go right behind the headlight buckets. And you'll go ahead and put those 2 in on both sides. And that'll be it for the actual bumper itself. And now what you'll do is you have a bracket that goes on the back side of the winch mount there. For me, what I do is I take the cable and I pull out probably, I don't know, 25 foot of it. And what that does is allows you to put the carriage bolts that are with that bracket from the back side, and then you can screw them in the front with the impact. The 2 end ones, you can get one side on the right side if you're facing the ATV. You can get that with the impact, but the one on the left side, if you're facing the ATV, you'll have to use a 15mm wrench because there's not enough room between the bumper, I think the bottom of the radiator, and something else is in the way there. So you just use a wrench on those, and that's the only one you'll have to tighten up by hand. But yeah, that's what I'll do now is I'll take that bracket, I'll stick it on the back side of the winch plate. The camera is kind of in a crappy position because it is a head mount, and I was trying to look up in there, but definitely did not get the correct angle. But if you have your winch this far on there and you look up in there, there's only one way this bracket can go on, because it's not going to bolt up to the frame without allowing you to get it in the correct position. So yeah, you'll put that piece, that clamshell is behind the mount on there, put your 4 carriage bolts and 4 15mm nuts on, and tighten them down until they stop. And what I'm going to use is an extension, a swivel, and a shallow 15mm socket, and that's going to make it easy for me to get up in here. I don't know, I think the angle, yep, again, is crappy. I'm sorry. But like I said, if you're this far into it, there's only one way that thing goes in there. So if you're looking up in below where the spool of the cable is, that's where your 2 bolts are that you're going to hit with the impact. And you'll go ahead and tighten both of those down. And trust me, you're going to probably cuss unless you have a pretty good impact, because those bolts, with that coating that they put on there and those lock nuts, they take forever to run down. And as you can see, I was tired of messing with those stupid bolts. I got the Mac Daddy out. 1/2 inch. That's a Mac one. It's a DeWalt. But it's like their brushless 1,200 foot-pounds put on braking or whatever. Yeah, they got the job done. I put them things down. Now I'm getting the 2-in ones with the wrench, or the 1-in one. I got 3 of them, and I just had to get this one side here. But yeah, be prepared. That sucker's on there pretty tight too, and you got to do it with a wrench now. Luckily, you only have to do one. So now what I'll do is I'll tighten those 2 13mm bolts up on the front part of the bumper, and then I'll get my 10mm wrench out, and I will take the last 2 wires that go to the winch. There's a yellow and a blue one. Sorry, my dog decided to chew his toy up right when I'm trying to do this voiceover, but yeah. Then I'll run those wires. I'll put the 2 rubber-coated ends over top the wires, put them onto the proper spots on the winch, your yellow and blue spot on the connector, tighten them down. When you're tightening those 10mm down on the winch, make sure you don't crank them down too tight. You just want to run the bolts down until they stop, and then just a little bit. You don't have to crank on it and put 1,000 foot-pounds of torque on it, because what will end up happening is it'll spin that post and break the wire on the inside of the winch, and then your winch is no good. So yeah, just tighten it down until it stops, and then just a little tiny bit more. You don't have to kill it. But yeah, once I get those 2 on, then I'll zip tie the wire up into the frame and make it look nice and neat, and hide it, and make it look pretty for the customer. And then if you're not putting a plow on this, you will go ahead and put the 4 10mm bolts that hold the bottom skid plate that I have the bungee cord holding it down into. And you'll go ahead and tighten that back down, and you'll be done. If you have a plow, you can leave those bolts out, and whenever I do the plow video for this, you'll thank me then. And I'll go ahead and make sure all the zip ties are nice and tight and every wire is secured. I'll go around both sides of the bikes, make sure all the wires are just tucked in and not visible whenever you get all the body work and stuff back on the ATV itself. Make sure there is no ends left on the zip ties, and I use a pair of side cutters that I actually just use them for cutting zip ties, and it basically cuts it off flush. It leaves no sharp little edge hanging out, so I can cut it off right there against the actual lock of the zip tie itself, if that's what you want to call it, with those cutters. And then you don't have to worry about brushing your hand in there one day working on it and slicing yourself open with the zip tie that's sharp. But yeah, we'll go ahead and get that done, and then we'll start wrapping this guy up and putting the plastic and stuff back on it. Pretty much it for this one. What we'll do is I'll kind of pan around and show you where I ran the wires, where I zip tied them up there, and yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll get this video wrapped up. I'm not too sure. I may show putting the plastic back on. It all just snaps back in though. There's just rubber grommets that hold the stuff back in. If you took it off, you should be able to put it back on. If not, drop me a comment if I, for some reason, don't show it, but I'm pretty sure I did video it on this. I don't think anybody walked in the frame and I had to cut that part out, but So I did have to cut the part out where I put the center shelter piece on that basically just clips in with rubber grommets that are on the existing plastic and frame spots there. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. If you are new to this channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Also, if you like this video, please hit the like button. As always, thanks and have a great day.